Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
What's up, Blazer fans? Welcome to the Blazers Edge podcast, part of the Almighty Baller Radio Network. We've spent the last week or so on this show on division previews, getting to know the other teams in the incredibly tough Western Conference. But today, my friends, we are bringing it back to Rip City. We are recording this on Monday, September 25th, which was Media Day. And tomorrow is the first day of training camp. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Now, unfortunately, my usual partner, Dan Meringue, is under the weather. I'm not sure if he's taken to bed because his heart is broken over Carmelo Anthony not coming to Portland, or if he lost his voice from yelling about it, or maybe he just has an early case of Nurk fever. But unfortunately, he's not able to join us, and I hope you feel better soon, Dan. I do have an excellent guest who is at the Moda Center today and is going to give us a recap of what went down. So joining me on the line is Blazers Edge news editor David McKay. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I guess I have to live up to that intro and be an excellent guest.
You will be. I am absolutely sure of it. So let's just dive in because I'm really anxious to hear about the team and what's going on. Now, obviously, everyone is putting their best foot forward today. People are in the best shapes of their lives. Everyone has a great attitude, and the ceiling will never be higher. But let's talk a little bit about what actually happens at Media Day. So can you kind of just walk us through what happens?
Sure. So I roll in about half an hour before the interviews start. I think doors opened at 11, and you have a bunch of the usual guys there. I think Casey and Joe and Mike got there before me. I arrived at the same time as Jason Quick and walked in together, and they have a nice little spread of food. There's some coffee, some very, very useful, fantastic coffee that drives everyone through the day. And, I think around, it must have been 11:30, everyone kind of circles up in front of the podium and the little backdrop, and they start with Neil. And he comes out there and he explains why everything's just fine. And then Terry comes out and he explains that everything's going to be normal. And then Chris McGowan, team president, of course, comes out and explains like business stuff, and that takes a little bit. But that's not like super interesting for the fans. Then you just go through the players one by one, asking questions for a few hours, and then you're done.
Well, all right. I actually got a chance to listen to some of it today, and there was a lot of questions from media where a lot of questions about, like how people had prepared physically in the off season, questions about what they were up to, what kind of fun things did they do. We'll get into more about what the players said about their off season, but let's go ahead and start with Neil Olshey and Chris McGowan, the faces of the franchise. What was Neil's message about the team? What was Mr. Olshey's message about the team this year?
President of basketball operations, Neil Olshey. It's interesting because before the draft, his message was, we need an immediate impact. We're going to go out there and get it. And then today his message was sort of, we tried our best. So, he mentioned that the West has gotten a lot stronger and that they tried to do their thing, but ultimately, you need two teams to make a trade. He talked a little bit about the rookies and how, they're going to eventually fit in and they'll develop behind the scenes, which, is not necessarily what everyone wanted to hear going in because, again, during the offseason, it was like, yeah, instant impact. And now it seems a little more subdued. But, it's more reasonable. I think this is probably the most accurate thing we can look at here is that the rookies will come in and they'll get their most of their development behind the scenes at practice. They'll get minutes where they can. And that was one of his main talking points. And I think something that the fans have interest in is, what the new guys are up to and what they're going to be like. And that's something that we asked a lot of the players about periodically was, have you seen the new guys? Have you seen the new guys? And, most of them kind of said that they keep to themselves, but, it'll be certainly interesting. And then McGowan talked about, again, the business interests. And I think something that will be a heavy heart for many fans is, the Blazers are not going to land the All-Star game for at least another several years. I think 2022 is the first year that Portland even has the opportunity to bid to host again, because the league informed them that they're not going to be a finalist in this latest bid, which was for 2020 and 2021.
So maybe in, what is that, 5 more years, they'll be able to put in a bid again for possibly hosting the All-Star. By then, the new hotels will be done, hopefully. Well, I want to go back to Mr. Olshey. Did he talk about anything about what has happened in the Western Conference over the off season?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he had mentioned that, obviously the West is like crazy stacked right now. And I think that's something that is pretty easy to identify, regardless of if you're president of basketball operations or just, like we are right now sitting at our computer screens. It's man, it's going to be tough. And the Blazers, they tried to improve, and, it's kind of that small market thing where they did so through the draft, and we'll see where they lie among the cluster of top teams there. But yeah, it's I think the rhetoric has changed from the thought that, last year they made the playoffs off of a late season push, and they were thinking like, yeah, we can push like this all this year and we'll for sure be a playoff team, to like, hopefully we make the playoffs, because now it's just going to be ridiculous.
Did anybody ask about the recent Carmelo Anthony trade, or some of the other big names that may have had interest, or other teams who may have had interest in dealing with Portland over the summer?
Yeah, there was a little bit on Carmelo, and again, that was sort of the whole thing about it takes 2 teams to make a trade. Obviously, the Blazers would have liked to improve, and it wasn't a secret that they were part of that, trying to get Carmelo. But, it's at that point where it is what it is. Everyone's kind of looking back at it like, had it happened, it would have been great, but you move on with what you have.
Sure. Speaking of moving on, let's go and talk about Mr. McGowan's talk. You mentioned that he talked about the hosting the All-Star team. Did he also bring up the patches?
Yeah, they haven't found an advertisement partner yet, but they're working on it, and they can put those on at any point during the season, so there's really no major rush. But yeah, I put something on those jerseys to distract from how, we'll say, how interesting the statement edition is.
We have not had a chance to really talk about the new uniforms on this podcast. I let my feelings be known on Twitter. Taking off of your reporter hat, what did you think about the new statement jerseys?
I was not so much a fan. I think that it's okay. So I'm going to go on a little tirade. Hopefully people will appreciate this. Maybe they won't. But I feel like everything with the NBA right now is getting simplified, and everything's like mass appeal. And we were getting block letters and flat colors. And for the sake of uniformity, we're really losing out on what gives brands and logos personality. And we're seeing that with the new like NBA playoffs logo that people are making fun of on Reddit and on Twitter. And we're seeing it again with the jerseys. I feel like a lot of them are overly simple. And while, it was sort of this bold decision to have it just be red and black instead of red, black, and white, I mean, it looks almost clunky. I don't even know if you can explain colors clashing in a clunky way, but the black stripes have, I think, a different tone of black within them, but you can't really see it if you're up close. And so it's just like, it almost looks like a something you would wear at the Y. It's not really like, flashy is not the right word. I don't know. You understand?
You know what I think they look like? I think they look like safety vests, like a red safety vest, like a crossing guard would wear, only except it looks like it's got a tire track over it, which I'm sure that they look much better in person. And you were there for the reveal of the new, what are they called again? Icon and assortment. What are they called? There's the Icon
I think
jersey
it's Icon and Association.
assortment association, whatever. You were there for the big reveal of those, so did they look better close up? Because
I think those were fine. They look crisp. It's just a matter of, I think they changed the font style a little bit and again flattened it and made it all nicely. I mean, I can't complain too much about that. It's essentially the same jersey. Very few people even noticed that there was a significant change. I will say that those look pretty clean, and I'm happy that they do. Statement jersey, not so much a fan. You said it looked like tire tracks. I showed my girlfriend, and she was like, "Oh yeah, it looks like when somebody dies and they hang the black ribbon over their picture at the funeral."
Oh yeah,
Like,
I know that when I saw them, I called up the picture on my phone and I ran to the backyard where my husband was barbecuing and I shoved my phone in his face for 10 minutes going, "Can you see what they did? Look what they did." And he's like, "I'm trying to cook. Calm down." And he was like, "I don't really have a problem with them." So there's definitely people out there who are like, "You know what? They're bold, they're easy to spot." They're definitely easy to spot, but I was quite shaken when I initially saw them, and I'm assuming that they're going to look much better in person.
Probably. I think
than the renderings.
With most things, people just kind of get used to them and then okay with them anyway. So once we start seeing them in the fan shop and people start wearing them on the streets, you'll just kind of adjust and be like, yeah, they're not so bad.
I just loved those old red jerseys so much. Those were my favorite. And I loved the little Rip City over, right on the back. I thought they were so cute. And now, yeah. Well, anyway, we were talking about the jerseys because we were talking about Chris McGowan's saying that there hasn't been a sponsor yet who's been selected for a patch, although they are actively looking for someone, and it can be at any time that they add that patch. Anything else from those two, that either questions they were asked or other talking points that they had that we haven't covered?
Not so much. They're really more of a lead-in.
Mm-hmm.
McGowan again is sort of like to make sure you have all your bases covered. I don't think any fans are going to be, leaping out of their seats to hear what the business side of things looks like.
Hush, everybody, hush! Chris McGowan's on.
He did mention that he tries to stay off of social media when they release stuff like that because regardless of whether the change is positive or negative, 90% of people are going to hate it right away.
Right. Yeah. It's probably a wise course of action.
yeah, probably wise.
If you're sensitive. Well, so after those two were at the podium, they were also Terry Stotts was up there before the players spoke. So what was Coach Stotts' message this year?
He talked a bit about internal development and seeing how the team's going to look and how we have a lot of returning players again. I think we have 12 returning players this year. I haven't counted. It's not in front of me right now. But the thing that interested me the most is he rarely talks about the lineup at Media Day. He always plays that a little close to the vest and makes decisions on the fly during the season. But he did mention that with the crowded front court and how many bigs we have this year, that we're going to see Farouk at the 3 more often, which is interesting because he's fun when you go kind of small ball and put him at the 4. And if he's playing 3, that raises questions for Evan Turner and Mo Harkless as well. So I was surprised that he elaborated on that and interested to kind of see what that means for guys like Caleb Swanigan, who, potentially have a spot available with Vonleh out to start the season. And, Myers Leonard, who has made big improvements as well, or says he has. And I hope that that's true. But, he also mentioned that with Noah injured, that's not going to change how they really approach the season. So there's room for flexibility there for guys to kind of figure out where they belong in the start. But ultimately, I think we're going to see Vonleh kind of back in that starting role.
I think Vonleh said that he was out maybe 5 or 6 weeks. I know they don't give definite timelines on there, but it sounds like he's going to miss, some pretty significant time. I mean, that's not a short recovery. I thought it was interesting. Another thing that Stott said about the actual, about the game and what the basketball was going to look like is he said that, the offense is going to work itself out, which is, I think, typically kind of how he, the last year, that was kind of what he said too. And he said that they're going to be going to the post more with Nurkic here. He's going to be talking about getting the ball early on the block and then seeing what happens, which that seems like a fairly significant change from at least the beginning of last year. But the other thing is there was a lot of talk among players and the coach about that significant needing to get a good start, and how important it was that they come out fighting. Can you think of other things that he talked about, just kind of about the attitude of the team this year? I know he said something about how this year wasn't so much about focusing on schemes and techniques so much as concentrating on focus and effort, which I thought sounded like he's saying these guys know the playbook. They've been together for a while, and now they need to come out with that kind of focus.
Yeah, there was something that Neil had mentioned right before Terry where he said that last year there was a sense of things being given and not earned because they kind of had that Cinderella run 2 years ago and thought, this will be easy. And then they came out cold to start last season. And then Terry kind of said, maybe that's not quite the way I'd put it, but there seems to be a sense that last year they started with a little bit of complacency. And this year, they're really focused. They're going to have urgency right out of the gate. I know that, that's something they're going to say every year.
Yeah.
This ragtag group of scrappers going to go out there and win a ship. But
this year, it's going to happen.
But yeah, and like you said, they've been together, which can only help. I think that's one of the things in that last year before LaMarcus left, that was a huge strength of the team, is they had all worked with Terry and in his sets for a few years together, and that's what made that cohesion so hard to deal with for other teams. And this team right now, this iteration of the Blazers, is mostly guys who have returned, and having Nurkic, I think, will be huge, having him for like a full season, especially if he's healthy, because again, talking about LaMarcus, we haven't really had a post presence, a formidable post presence since LaMarcus was here. So to be able to, put it down on the block and open up the guards to kind of do more things along the perimeter is going to be a lot more fun because we have some really talented guards. I'm excited personally, and I don't get excited as much as I should anymore, but to see what this team can do. I mean, honestly, it's kind of an unknown quantity, and that's unique because we have so many returning parts, but just this one significant change that we saw as just sort of briefly at the end of last season could make or break this team.
Is definitely very tantalizing. Just want to see some more of that. One other thing before I move on to the players that I can't remember if it was Neil Olshey or Stotts, perhaps you remember. They talked about how Dame didn't do the San Diego trip this year, and that's one of the ones that I'd been wondering about. I was like, hey, we haven't gotten the beach picture yet this year from the beach trip, and I think it was Olshey who talked about it. But he talked about how the guys this year have like a much more work-based attitude as opposed to having to build camaraderie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Olshey. And I know that was Olshey because had they done the beach trip, he would have said, hooray, camaraderie. And had they not said, hooray, work, there's always a positive spin. That perhaps that's a bit jaded. But anyway, there is a sense now that they all know each other. There's no period where everyone needs to like come in and, play Never Have I Ever and like, two truths
and a lie.
Yeah, to get to know each other. Because they've all worked together, they've all played together, they've all learned together and grown together. So now it's just time to get down to brass tacks. And with that urgency that we talked about, I think that's going to be really beneficial.
Well, let's get to what the players had to say. Why don't you just go ahead with however you wanted to introduce what they talked about? Who said what are the highlights?
Sure. Well, I believe we started with Nurkic, which is interesting because I think we usually start with Dame. But anyway, Nurkic came out and we talked about his weight loss, which was sort of a big thing. Everyone wanted to key in on that, which was a point of humor and also um, legitimately important. And it sounds like he has lost 34, 35 pounds, but he's still 270 pounds, which is, that's a lot of human being to go out there on the court. And I know that was one of the things that fans like to chat about during the August lull was, hey, he's lost a bunch of weight and he'll be more agile, but like, will it be a sacrifice of strength and can he still body people? And he's going to be out there pushing people around, no question about it. So that was the main thing we talked about with Nurkic. We touched on his extension possibility a little bit, just because, his contract situation is up in the air, but he said, and I believe him, any player is going to say this, but I think he legitimately means it, that he wants to be in Portland. He wants to be here. And Olshey, no, was it Olshey? Maybe it was Stotts. Olshey? Probably Olshey. Yeah, it was Olshey. Anyway, said, he wasn't going to talk about the extension because that's something that they're just not going to make a public conversation just yet. But for the time being, he's here. And he's set to have hopefully a stellar season. And then, sorry, what?
Well, he made a comment which I was really excited about, and I think a lot of Blazer fans were excited about the Bad Boys.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, let's see. He list off, was it Rashid and a couple other guys when
he said, you know who the Bad Boys are, right?
Yeah.
He said that he was hoping that the team could have a little bit of that attitude, which I thought was really interesting. And I've heard from a number of fans who are looking to see a team that has come out with a little edge. And boy, that's a team that had edge.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because, like, you're not supposed to root for fights when you're watching sports, and I don't. But, like, when you see one and you see the team kind of come together and be like, hey, man, you're messing with my point guard, and, he shoves him back, and that sort of, like, we're not going to let you push us around, or maybe we're going to push you around. Like, that's something that, we used to get from Joel Freeland occasionally off the bench, but really we've had such a nice persona lately that it'd be nice to kind of get out there and maybe knock some elbows and be a real force verbally and physically. And I think Nurkic is ready to do that. He's always had kind of the that edge to him, isn't there? I feel like there's a video. I can't remember who it was, but he like dunked on them and then put the ball in their lap.
Oh yeah.
You know which one I'm talking about?
I do know, and I don't know who he did that to, but I do remember that.
Yeah, he tried to draw a charge or something, and it was an obvious flop, and so he just went up for an easy dunk and like set the ball on top of him. It was, I'll have to look that up. But fans who are listening right now, go to YouTube, search Nurkic does something cool or whatever you think the term will be that gets that video, and it's pretty interesting.
Well, anything else about Nurk? Who came after him?
Dame came after him. Nurkic was actually a pretty short interview, but Damian came out and talked about, leadership. I think is always one of those talking points for him. But he says the West is strong, but after those top three teams or so, that it's wide open, and he wants to be one of those teams that's not on the fringe of the playoffs, but that's on the fringe of being in that top 4, top 5 in that conversation. Whether or not I think the Blazers will be there is irrelevant, but he seems pretty confident that with the right work ethic, they can be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, and you certainly want that out of him. You certainly want him, preparing, not like just trying to make it into the playoffs, but trying to be right in there in the conversation. The big topic that took a lot of time with Dame, I thought, was his new diet. A lot of discussion about vegan Dame.
Yeah, I think that's one of those silly things. It's kind of like media day is always sort of a how was your summer conversation, and he changed to a vegan diet, and I think he said his favorite food was vegan sloppy joes.
Yes. Well, I thought it was interesting. Full disclosure, I happen to be vegan and my family is too, but we haven't been for a super long time. It's kind of an on again, off again thing. But one of the things that he said that I related to was he was talking about why he did it. And weight loss was one thing, but he said one thing that he has realized is that he thinks it's going to affect his recovery, because he talked about how when he was really super tired, he doesn't feel as gassed as he did before. Like he said that he'd get tired and his arms are hanging and his head is hanging, and he said that he still gets tired, but he felt like it had made a difference in just how affected he was by fatigue, and about how quick he was able to bounce back. I was actually really surprised at how much diet talk there was across all the players today. there were a lot of questions about people's diet, because they wanted to talk about Al-Farouq Aminu's weight, and they talked about Damien's diet, and I think there was at least one more person who they asked a lot of diet questions of.
Yeah, that's one of the traditional default media day questions, when there's kind of a lull in interesting topics where people are trying to think of the next thing they want to ask. So you just kind of go to hey, how did you change your diet? What was your workout regimen? And that kind of buys you a few minutes to to have a more interesting conversation. But with Damien, yeah, that was pretty interesting. He had mentioned that he wants to play at 190. He's currently 193. Last year, he started the season at 198. And one thing that I don't want to say I took exception to, because that's too strong. I thought it was more humorous than anything else. He's like, I'm trying to drop weight and make things easier on my body. I'm getting old. I'm 27. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm 27. Come on, man. Like, I don't want to feel old just yet if I can help it.
Well, maybe if you go vegan. I'm trying to get Dan to go vegan too. I'm thinking Hoodie Dan on a vegan diet. We could get a lot of exciting takes out of him.
I could not imagine Dan as a vegan.
Anything else you want to touch on with CJ or with Dame before moving on to CJ?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, media day, unless there's some major reveal, is a lot of just kind of catching up. And he talked about the strength of the conference, how he wants to be in the conversation, change a diet,
CJ talked about changing his hair. It was getting pretty deep in there.
That I think I tweeted about that. It's not media day until someone asks a haircut question.
Yeah. No, it must be hard to be on your feet and be trying to think up. I mean, imagine you probably do you have specific questions when you go into the room for each player, and then somebody takes your question and you're like, oh no, I got to come up with a different question?
I used to, and that very same thing used to be an issue where I'd be like, oh, I'm going to ask this and it's going to be great, and then someone else would ask it and I go, well, shoot, now I have to think. But usually, well, you were watching the stream, I believe, but my style these days is to just kind of listen to what the people have to say early on with Coach and Neil and everyone, and then loop that back into my questions later and be like, hey, Terry said this, and I think this impacts you in this way. How, what do you think about that? Or I don't know. I usually just kind of talk about something someone else has said and bring that up for a player and be like, hey, Farouk, Coach said you're going to be playing more 3. Is that something you're looking forward to? Something you think you'll be a good role there? And then talk to Evan. I think I asked Evan about that and said with Farouk at the 3, has Coach talked to you about what you're going to do? And I usually, I work on my feet that way.
Well, those moments of silence during media day are tough, because I think after maybe the first or second question after Damien, there was this silence. And then the person who was running the show said, does anyone have any more questions for Damien? And I was thinking, oh my gosh, we can't be done already. He only talked for 5 minutes. This is Damien.
Yeah, that's Jim. He was asking you guys got anything else to say? But last year, I think I was asking most of the first questions. This year was Mike Richmond, who started with the mic each time and would ask, and then kind of look around and be like, all right, anyone else? And then Jason would hop in and we'd start getting things going. But yeah, there were several times during the day where if you don't watch Media Day, whoever's listening right now, you'll get a lot of juicy quotes, but there's also a lot of silence between them.
As everyone's thinking and writing. Well, yeah. What else stood out about the players when they were up at the podium? Who said something that surprised you or made you think?
surprised me. You know who had a really good interview was Myers.
Okay.
And it wasn't so much that he surprised me because like I feel like every year he says, I did something new and I'm going to be a new me, but this year he's healthy, which is I think is big, and that's something I've mentioned here and there in different conversations is that I feel like a lot of times people look at health as a very polar thing in the NBA where you're either 100% or you're 0%. You're playing or you're not, and people don't give a lot of wiggle room for playing but hurting. And Myers, I think a lot of last year with the back problems and prior to that recovering from shoulder surgery and having had shoulder surgery, like you don't feel 100% right away as soon as you're able to do something. There's still pain, and he drew a lot of scrutiny for his poor play, and some of that's on him. But like this year, and I just wrote an article about this for whoever's listening and feels like going back and reading what I'm sure will be yesterday's by this point. Is that when this is going up?
It'll go up Tuesday. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yesterday's article is that, he doesn't have any obstacles in his way anymore. There's no excuses. He's not physically hurting. He's mentally in a good spot. This is the Meyers Leonard we're going to get. He is primed to be the best that he will be. That doesn't mean he'll be a star, but it means that we'll get like a really good gauge of what he could be, what he should be, what he will be. And he talked about how he had spoken with Wesley Matthews at the All-Star game and was like, hey man, you need to check out Drew Hanlen. And he said, okay. He went and he found a trainer and he worked over the summer and he was legitimately passionate. And that's something that, Myers is sneakily, I think this, a lot of fans miss this because they see that he lacks confidence on the court. But in speaking with him, he's usually like really upbeat. He's really sarcastic and witty. And he'd been kind of missing that last year. He was sort of in this little darkness nosedive. But the passion is back. I think he's ready. And it was really exciting to hear him speak not only what he said, but how he said it. And I've been a Meyers Leonard believer is maybe strong, but I think he gets a lot of undue criticism and a lot of due criticism, but he'll be an interesting player to watch this year.
Yeah, I was very, I was almost kind of moved by some of the stuff that he said because he talked about needing to go he said Wesley kind of took care of me. And it kind of made me think about like, wow, like, I knew that when that team broke up, it took away some of the people that he had been very close to, including also his coach, Kim Hughes. And I know that had affected him. But so he talked about going to Wesley and really, needing some guidance on how to make his game better. And then he talked about with Drew Hanlen, Drew being able to specifically pinpoint some mechanical things that he hadn't really realized were an issue with him. And I thought that was, I just thought that was interesting how he reached out. And when, sometimes when you reach out and you're making yourself, kind of vulnerable to somebody, you're going to work super hard because you put your trust in them. And I thought that came across in his very animated interview, like you were saying. He was very animated, and boy, at the end, the last 35 seconds of that, he has a message for the people who he said, I think, were behind their little screens. And he really has, like you said, he has a lot to prove. And we're in this place just about every year, but every year I believe that he's going to go out there and do it.
Well, and some of the things he touched on were fascinating. He had mentioned that Drew said, like if he tilts his shoulders, I think it was back or forward 15 to 20 degrees, it changes his transition 3-point percentage from like 60% to like 20 or 30%. So he needs to be mindful of shooting with consistent form and how he wants that to be. And that's that sort of sports science realm where, if you have a player who's interested in legitimately investing in that side of basketball and learning what mechanically is wrong with their game, then that I think influences the mental side. You get more confidence in your game itself.
I believe he touched on it a couple of times, saying, now I have something to do. Now I have something to turn to. Now if things are going wrong, I have a routine and I know what I should be doing. I know what to look for. Like you were saying, that one example of his
foundation. That was his
That's
thing.
what it was.
Foundation.
Yeah, I have a foundation now. So get at it, Myers. You can do it. Let's see. And any of the guys who we don't see that much on the field there? Caleb Swanigan. We talked very, very briefly about the rookies at the beginning. What kinds of things were the veterans saying about the rookies?
So some of them hadn't really watched. I think it was Ed who said, I just kind of take care of myself, and I hope everyone else is doing fine. But I had asked Noah, after he hurt his shoulder, what he saw from the sidelines, because it's different as a spectator than as an active player. And he had mentioned that Swanigan was looking really good, and Damien had said that Swanigan was looking really good. And anyone who you asked to pinpoint one player that looked really good to them, they all said Caleb Swanigan, which is super encouraging and kind of nice, because if you ask Swanigan himself, you're going to get maybe 4 or 5 word answers. But he's going to be an interesting piece, because that was one of the things where the players all said great things, and then Terry and Neil both said something to the effect of they'll get their development behind the scenes, but I don't know about opportunities just yet. So when we open the season, I wouldn't expect to see him or Zach be playing super regularly. Well, they'll play probably most nights. That's just my speculation. But they're not going to be impact players right out of the gate. But it seems like there's really room for especially Caleb to do good things in year one.
Mm-hmm. Were Jake and Shabazz and Pat Connaughton, were they around? Did you see them anywhere?
They were around. I think I saw Pat signing balls as I was leaving, but typically, if someone's not in high demand from the media, then they don't come out for an interview. So by the time we got to, I think Noah was the last one, Jim was asking us if there was anyone else, and I asked for Zach, and I think he had to leave early for something else, so he was unavailable. But we didn't really talk to Shabazz, we didn't talk to Jake or Pat. I think Neil mentioned CJ Wilcox's 2-way contract, but that's about as far as we dove into the end of the roster and sort of the stragglers.
And Anthony Morrow, I didn't see, but I did see that he hopped on Talking Ball, I think, afterwards.
Oh,
yeah, because he was talking about how he likes to go to the screen door. More of that hard-hitting media day stuff.
It's the spot for brunch in Portland, I hear.
Yeah, it is. It's quite nice. Well, What do you think? Can you summarize what you think some of the things that the fans should be excited about this year? I mean, I know, again, it's media day. It's the highest ceiling is ever going to get. But what are some things that you think fans can take away from media day?
Well, we have a confirmed, much lighter, much healthier Jusuf Nurkic, who hopefully will not be winded in the second quarter anymore. So that's going to be big. That's going to be fun for fans to watch for. It seems like we're going to have a slightly new style of offense. It's not completely retooled, but we're going to be running it a little differently through Nurkic from time to time. We have some exciting rookies. We didn't, it's funny. We actually didn't talk very much about Zach, even though Zach wasn't there, which surprised me because there was all that hullabaloo about, trading up to get him when we got him. And then it seems like he's not really even a conversation right now, but we have some exciting rookies. I think just overall, it's interesting because the team didn't change a whole lot. And that was one of the talking points is consistency, everyone's back. But at the same time, we don't know what this team will be. It could be, like Dame said, it could be that 4th, 5th team. They could miss the playoffs. So in a way, I'm more invested in this season than I have been in years past, just because I have no idea what's going to happen.
I thought it was interesting from a fan's perspective that I mean, we've spent the last 2 years watching them bond and get close, and that's been really fun to watch. But there was a lot of business discussion. I mean, there was a lot of basketball discussion today. There was a lot of discussion about attitudes and getting out there from the beginning, which, we would expect to, hear from them. But I feel like in years past, there was, a big, heavy emphasis on how well they all get along and what Dame's leadership style was like. And this year it was like, we got to get out there and we got to get to work because we got stuff to prove, because we did not have a year last year like we wanted. And we need to come out there and we need to show people that we're better than they thought we were last year. So as a fan, I was encouraged about that attitude also coming from them.
Yeah. It's that's something we touched on a few times, was accountability. I think there's a ready-made urgency as we start this season, which is unique to this year.
Yeah, I loved what CJ said about accountability. He said accountability doesn't mean yelling at people, and he expanded on that a little bit. And he talked about it's about developing relationships, and Dame talked about accountability being knowing what your job is. And that just seemed to, those two statements really seem to represent the way those two guys have been leading the team. I mean, CJ talked about how he'd been chatting with over Evan Turner over the summer. And, and somebody was like, why have you guys been, was it FaceTiming? And he was like, how do you know we were FaceTiming? That's like sources. But, CJ talked about is because he wanted to develop a closer relationship with ET, and it was on the backs of him talking about, accountability and
I think that's your end.
It was on the back of him talking about accountability and developing relationships, and then he went into trying to develop his relationship with Evan Turner. So I think they're taking the business of basketball very seriously this year. Not that I don't think that they weren't before, but like we said, that extra urgency to come out with the chip on their shoulder, maybe be the bad boys.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down for that. Anything that's exciting. That was kind of my philosophy for if we got Melo, was, at least it's exciting. So if the Blazers want to go out there and be bad boys, I'm all for it.
Do you think they will be exciting? What are your preseason? What are the preseason things that you're going to say that you're going to watch for, I guess?
Exciting compared to other teams, or exciting in their own right?
What do you consider? What would you consider an exciting year by the Trailblazers?
Oh, an exciting year by the Trailblazers. So if they can get up to 50 wins in this conference, that's exciting.
Holy smokes, that would be exciting.
That'd be crazy exciting. The nice thing is like people sometimes go and they look like, okay, well, they're in a super tough conference, so they're not going to do well, but they're still going to play the Eastern Conference plenty. And the Western Conference is not invulnerable, so it's possible that they'll succeed. I think they were 40? Were they 500 last season? 40?
They were 41-41 last year.
Yeah, so if we assume that last year's run with Nurkic wasn't a fluke, and that we do have a certain level of internal growth, and that Nurkic will be healthy, and this team will be strong, then even in the Western Conference they could improve upon last year's record. If they do that, they could be a playoff team. And that, to me, is exciting. I think the least exciting outcome would be for them to go out and struggle right away like they did last year, and then try and dig themselves out of a hole like they did last year, and then barely scrape into the playoffs like they did last year, which seems like a very real possibility. But, the biggest thing for me is just the rookies, probably. I like watching the young guys. I like seeing how they do. And they're the biggest question marks right now.
Yeah, I think they didn't talk much about Zach Collins because they're kind of trying to protect him, because when they did talk about him, they talked about him in the context of, but he's very, very young and it's going to take a few years to develop him. It's the same narrative that they used to, also say about Myers, although Myers did have playing opportunity pretty early because of just the situation. But right now they're pretty deep in the front court.
And here's, I guess, my thing with Zach Collins, and it's not like a personal thing, but, they made a big stink about getting the best player available, and a lot of people felt that Zach Collins was not the best player available. They didn't work him out. They only sent him a personality test. He got to Vegas and he struggled and then got injured. And after games in which he struggled, he was extremely hard on himself, which kind of reminds you that he's 19. And then he's kind of underweight for his height, and he'd been billed as this immediate impact. And now I think what's happening is you're seeing the front office kind of dial that back. I mean, it's a tough conversation to walk back, but if they can do it, they're trying. And they want to temper expectations, which is very, very curious because Caleb has been doing really well. And it's sort of that thing where, you're only going to talk about the thing that's going right. Mm-hmm. Which isn't to say that Zach is going wrong, but that we don't know because they're not talking about it. To be fair, we didn't really ask about it, so it's not like they're going to bring it up if we don't. But just the fact that it wasn't of interest to a lot of the media members there is concerning to me, because I think, and this is something I've said before, is that I think he's going to be a couple years before he's an impact player. And with all the talk about Damian Lillard's timeline and trying to get people in his prime, and this is a whole tirade for another time. But, I'm curious to see what happens with Collins, and I think a lot of people are curious to see what happens with Swanigan.
I have a theory about Damian's timeline and the ability of Portland to attract free agents. And I think it comes from there was an article out this summer about how important the Olympic team is. The players who played on the Olympic teams are all now ending up on teams together. Partly the theory being that they had all this time together playing for the Olympics and they got to know each other and they decided that they were going to all play together. So I think we need to start looking at the rosters of what do you call the team that practices against the Olympic team? Those guys are more in the Dame and CJ age group, and I think we need Miles Turner and Anthony Davis, and some of those younger guys who. Did Anthony Davis play in the Olympics? I can't remember if he did or not. But we need to look at that up and coming group of Olympics players. Those are going to be the guys that I think the Portland's going to have a better chance of bringing to Portland in free agency. Yeah.
See, free agency is as well as I do, historically not Portland's strong suit. But at a certain point, you have to question if management has done everything they can, how much of it is on them and how much of them is on the market. We look at OKC and they were able to obtain Paul George through trade, but that's not exactly a huge market. OKC is not known for its bumping nightlife and ability to draw a crowd. And they somehow turned an off season of, all we have is Russ into, okay, we added Paul George and we added Carmelo Anthony. Oh, and we might add Dwayne Wade, depending upon how that takes out. So, it can be done, but in Portland, it just feels impossible.
But those guys were all a part of that Olympic team.
Yeah, you're right.
And they are friends from that. They are, they went to that together. But anyway, that, like you said, that is a topic for another podcast. Tomorrow's training camp. Are you going to be at the facility tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll turn up. I'll probably bring my camera and do some video work, maybe take some pictures. So, watch out for that on Twitter and whatnot. But I'll probably take some interview footage and post it on Blazers Edge.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on and giving us some of your highlights from Media Day today. Do you want to go ahead and tell folks how to find your work? You already did, I guess. It's on Blazers Edge, but how can they find you on Twitter?
Sure. Well, my work is, as you said, on Blazers Edge. And if you follow the link in my articles to David McKay, NBA, that is my Twitter handle. That's McKay with the Scottish spelling, MACKAY. I'm usually pretty active, and as the season gets underway, I'll be more active, and I'm always happy to talk ball with people.
Is your nickname DMAC?
It kind of is. That's sort of like a default nickname, in a sense that anywhere I go, if someone says, "Hey, DMAC," I know they're talking to me.
I can see your face, so you don't look very excited about that nickname. Do you have one that you prefer?
Oh. Well, I guess so. This is a dumb story, and people can enjoy it if they so choose. But I've been called Dolb for like, what is this? Like 10, no, 13, 14 years. And it started out as Danny's little brother because my older brother's name is Danny. And we had a lot of people in our friend group named David. And his friends thought it would be funny. And then it got shortened to DLB and then to Dolb. And then it's just kind of, that one stuck with me a while.
Well, okay. Dolb McKay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dolb.
Oh, God.
As always, you can find Blazers Edge on Twitter at Blazers Edge. You can find me at TCB Biggs, or you can just type in Team Mom Rip City. You can find the podcast on the Almighty Baller Radio now at almightyballer.com, or subscribe on Stitcher or iTunes or whatever podcast catcher you like. Also, I encourage everyone to hop on over to blazersedge.com, where you will find news from David and the rest of the news staff and analysis and features by our other fine writers. Thank you for being an excellent guest, David McKay. And thank you to our listeners. We will catch you next time.